Thanks, Terry. Thank you. Yep. All right. Howdy. Come on. Let's get underway. We finally made it to the end of the semester. This must be a good feeling for you guys. At least one more assignment out of the way. How many more assignments have you got to submit this week? 2? Okay, so it's almost down. Hey, here we go. They look like assignment number 1. Excellent. All right, cool. I might use that box too because I forgot to bring a box. Oh, here comes everyone. Come on in. So, yeah, like I said, we've finally made it to the end of the semester, and this lecture's a fairly short one. Do you want guys, someone's over there. So this lecture is probably going to be a fairly short one, with quite deliberately so, because I want to talk about the exam and give you a chance, guys, to ask questions about the exam. So I'll just do a short sort of wrap up of the unit, sort of where we started, where we ended up with, and a bit of a look at where I think the data warehousing industry is headed over the next couple of years or so. Interestingly, I haven't actually changed much on these slides in the past few years. I reckon the data warehousing industry is pretty static. The kinds of changes that are happening in the data warehousing industry tend to be around technologies. Technologies like in-column databases and in-memory analytics and things like that, which are well and good. And if you're interested in those sort of things, go out and Google the terms. But they don't fundamentally change what a data warehouse does or how it integrates with an organisation. So kind of the conclusion of the unit is that the key problems for data warehousing in organisations is how the technology integrates with decision-making processes and the impact that it has on organisational power, organisational information flows, organisational structures. So the challenges are really organisational, not technical. And okay, we can perhaps load a bit more data into our data warehouses today than we could 10 years ago, and maybe the queries run a little bit faster. But these are not really groundbreaking changes to the fundamental idea of what data warehousing does. But anyway, that's kind of skipping ahead to my conclusion without actually building up to where we are. Whoa. Issues with my computer. It's a Monday morning for my computer, so it's this is what we're going to do. So I'll look at what we set out to achieve, what we did cover, what we didn't cover, but sort of you now have the skill set to kind of understand a little bit better. And what I think is kind of happening with the data warehousing industry, as I mentioned. So this is where we started off. This is the unit aim, comes from the handbook and the unit guide. And there's no way in 13 weeks or 12 weeks, as we have now, that we could possibly cover every single topic there is in data warehousing to cover. And this is kind of true of most of the 5,000 level units. We can cover a couple of things in depth, but there's no way to cover every single nuance of a 5,000 level topic in 12 weeks. So what we set out to do was to give you guys what we call an intellectual framework, which is a fancy word for saying we highlight the main key issues, give you a bit of understanding and insight into some of the problems, and give you the tools really to form your own opinions, use your own intellect and your own critical thinking skills to fill in the blanks. So that's really what we set out to do. So we looked at data warehousing, and particularly the need for evolutionary development in data warehousing. And the running theme throughout the semester was what's fundamentally different about a data warehouse compared to other kinds of IT systems, other kinds of databases used for transaction processing. And it's those points of difference that have really driven the content of the semester. So we looked at what a data warehouse is. Week one, we defined a data warehouse. Does everyone remember the InMod and the Hackathon definition? Subject-oriented, integrated, yada, yada, yada. Yep, okay, cool. Just checking. So we covered that definition. We looked at who does data warehousing, so who's involved in the process. We've got developers, designers, we've got decision makers, who we're primarily trying to support. Obviously, the fundamental aim of a data warehouse is to improve organisational decision-making processes, to make them more informed. And the consequences of that are pretty profound. The difference between managing transactions and supporting a decision-making process is a fundamentally different thing. And that places significant design requirements on a data warehouse that are fundamentally different. So as a result, we looked at data warehousing as a process. We looked at the kind of Kimball metaphor of treating data warehousing as a publishing process. The idea of taking data from one place, working with it, editing it, changing it, transforming it, and then delivering it to end users so that they could actually make better decisions is kind of the stuff that we looked at in week two. In weeks 3 and 4, we looked at using an alternative to ER modelling to design the schemas for a data warehouse. And we also covered the different ways of structuring the technology. After that, we moved into the more organisational side of things. We looked at methodologies, we looked at how you could perhaps compare different methodologies, and we saw the fact that there's not much in the way of independent, non-commercial recommendations in terms of methodologies. Most of them are based on commercial offerings, white papers, consulting services and things like that. Not to say that they're necessarily bad, but of course the methodologies are developed necessarily with the aim of selling those consulting services and products. We looked at CRM a little bit. At least we covered the idea, and we looked at how data warehouses can be used for marketing and managing that relationship with customers. And we looked at how that might change some of the dimensional modelling stuff that we did. So we looked at Todman's generalised conceptual model for designing a customer data warehouse. And we looked a little bit at data mining. We didn't delve into it in too much depth, but we covered it and gave you a bit of a flavour for what data mining can do and what it's about. And we covered topics of governance. Did David finally cover governance last week? No, he's going to do it this week, isn't he? Yeah. So we got our syllabuses out of sync, but you'll get governance again from David, but from the DSS side this time. So hopefully everyone remembers this slide. I've put it up a few times. If you haven't committed it to memory yet, do so. This is the evolution, or the need for evolutionary development comes from work done by Peter Keen way back in 1980, in fact 1970s really, published in 1980, and it's based on the idea that that problem around requirements elicitation for decision support. So Peter Keen wasn't talking about data warehouses, he was talking about decision support systems. But the need for evolutionary development in decision supports drives the need for evolutionary development in the infrastructure that provides support for decision support systems as well. So the warehouse contributes to the user's changing understanding of the decision problem, but that changing understanding drives changes in information requirements, which in turn require changes to the data warehouse. And it's an ongoing process. And that creates problems for us from a requirements elicitation perspective. It also creates problems from a putting together the business case perspective as well. It's very difficult to define beforehand the benefits that a data warehouse is going to deliver to an organisation until you've actually built it and start using it. Nevertheless, a sound business case is pretty important. You need to win senior executive support for a data warehousing project. That's kind of a critical thing. And you need to work with the idea, or bring the organisation along and sell them on the idea that this kind of stuff necessarily happens. If it doesn't happen, then they don't get adequate decision support. But it does mean that the traditional sort of project management techniques like deliverables and milestones become harder to manage. So you need to come up with a strategy to handle that. So that's one key point of difference. Here are some things that we didn't cover. We touched on very, very lightly. So we talked a little bit about metadata and how metadata it's just another kind of data. So it needs to be managed and has the same kind of challenges to an organisation as any other kind of data does. We didn't talk too much about master data management, which is something which is a bit of a hot topic in industry. At least it was a year or two ago. It's gone off the boil a little bit as BI vendor marketers try to find the next marketing buzz term to push their products. But master data management is about trying to come up with common definitions of terms across the organisation to come up with a consistent view of organisational data, which is obviously very closely related to data warehousing and very useful to do in conjunction with the data warehousing project. It's not necessarily data warehousing in and of itself, it's an organisational strategy to manage data in a cross-functional kind of way. And can allow for things like federated bus architectures that Kimball talks about, which we looked at a couple of weeks ago. We didn't touch on query tools because that's really the domain of FIT 5093, the BI applications unit. But you can't design a data warehouse without considering the delivery system. So we looked at how important that delivery system was to the design of the data warehouse, and when they become out of sync, you start to end up with a very large, very expensive database that doesn't really do much for you. It's sort of a white elephant, if you will. I know David's in 5094 has a slightly different view and argues for separation of developing the data warehouse from the decision support system. It's interesting to have the debates with David about that. We both agree with the data, and we kind of both vigorously agree right up until the very last point of coming up with a conclusion to the argument. But anyway, that's a debate that will be ongoing. The types of users are fundamentally different. We didn't cover too much in terms of business or management theory, management science. Again, that's the domain of another unit, 5094. Many of you are studying that unit anyway, so you're picking up on that. But the nature of our users is fundamentally different to the nature of users of transaction processing systems, and that creates a challenge for us as well. A couple of other things that we haven't talked too much about is the web. And there's actually a couple of different aspects to sort of web enablement of business intelligence and data warehousing. All of the tools, it's a broad generalisation, 95% of the business intelligence tools, the delivery system tools, operate via the web now, or have the capability to operate via the web. There may be a customised desktop client, but nearly all BI tools you can access using a browser, JavaScript and those kinds of things, and you get that creative, interactive kind of environment via the browser. However, BI and delivering data warehouse data via the web is just one aspect of that. The other aspect is that the web is now a very significant source of data for business intelligence, not just in terms of gathering, say, competitive intelligence on your competitors in the marketplace and using published web-based data. But for a lot of organisations, the web is now another channel for communication with suppliers and customers and so on. The data generated by visitors to the organisation's website is particularly useful for understanding potential customers and existing customers, especially if there's a sort of an e-commerce aspect to the organisation. Then the web server, the organisation's web presence, becomes a source of data that needs to be integrated with the rest of the data in the data warehouse. And that can be quite a challenge because the nature of that data is quite different. So the kinds of analytical tools you use to understand that data can be slightly different to the traditional sort of sales transaction processing kind of data. So there's two aspects to the web side of things. There's one, we now need to push our data out via the web and make it accessible via various mobile platforms and things like that. But also the web is now a big source of data for the data warehouse, and we have to integrate that into the warehouse. Oh, I moved on a slide without realising I moved on a slide. Is it just one? Okay. So, like I said, what we've tried to do is sort of give you a key points of or key issues in the data warehousing area to allow you to make an informed decision about what's different about data warehousing, how should you approach data warehousing projects differently to other kinds of IT projects. So for many of you, you've done 5094, so you'll have a bit of background understanding about the nature of managerial decision support. So that's IT for management decision making. I also highly recommend doing the business intelligence applications unit because that focuses on the delivery system. So it's the other side of the data warehousing equation. If you don't have an understanding of that delivery system, then you really only have a very blinkered view of the overall data warehousing process. You have to consider the delivery system as well. But in terms of where you guys go from here and getting into the BI industry or data warehousing development, the key is to be engaged with the industry. There's lots of material out there. One of the things I've hopefully imparted to you is a healthy scepticism of the vendor literature, but hopefully I haven't scared you off actually reading the vendor literature. It's useful. It's important to stay in touch with what the industry is talking about and what it's doing, where it is changing, where it isn't changing, and the same sort of mistakes that the industry keeps making are important to keep in touch with. But there's also really good material in the form of blogs and things like that from consultants who talk about day-to-day kinds of problems that they have building data warehouses. So it's important to stay engaged and part of that community. The other side of sort of reading things is actually going along to different events, go along to vendor seminars. One of the most important things I do for staying up to date with sort of this material is going along to the marketing seminars and the conferences and events that the vendors put on, just to see where they're going and, like I said, how they've changed and how they haven't changed. And the free muffins and free drinks and stuff like that are a bit of a bonus. They're worth going to. So get on the mailing lists. A lot of it is just marketing material, but some of it is interesting customer case studies and things like that. So go along. If you go along, you'll see me going along as well. So it's good to catch up once you guys have left the unit. But it's about staying engaged with the material. It also allows you to do a bit of networking with people in the industry already. So being able to get into the BI industry is largely about noticing opportunities as they crop up. It's notoriously hard to become a BI developer going through the normal sort of recruitment processes of Seek.com and things like that. By far the most common route into the BI industry is to be an IT developer or a consultant and work your way onto a BI project. So you've got to stay plugged in. The other thing which I should have put on the slide is getting in touch with the Data Warehousing Institute. They've recently restarted or become more active again here in Melbourne, and that is a vendor-neutral sort of environment or forum. They meet on a monthly kind of basis, and if you want to go for the first couple of events, they don't mind you going for free, but if you're going on a regular basis, it's worthwhile signing up and becoming a member of the Data Warehousing Institute. The main parent body is US based, but there is a local Australian chapter both here in Melbourne and in Sydney as well. So they're good to go along to. So keep surfing, keep reading, keep in touch, just stay engaged. You may want to do tool-specific courses. I often get questions from people saying, should I do Oracle certification or Cognos certification, those kinds of things. And I'm a bit sort of ambivalent about them. They're incredibly expensive. I know Monash units are incredibly expensive too, but these courses they genuinely are expensive. And look, recruiters will look at them on the CV and go, yep, Oracle if you've done the Oracle certification, or tick the box, yeah, you've done Cisco certification or whatever. So they do have a role to play. But in terms of becoming a well-rounded business intelligence or data warehousing practitioner, I think they're of more limited value. So they're a good marketing device, and they certainly do teach you the depth of the specifics about particular tool sets. But one of the things that's common across data warehousing and BI is that there's a variety of tools out there, a variety of different, a mix and match of different tools are put together to build up the business intelligence stack or architecture. And you need to be across more than just one specific tool set. So sure, you could go out and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on doing every single vendor course there is, but in 5 years' time, I reckon most of that knowledge is going to be fairly obsolete. The real benefit comes from actually working on projects, developing that experience from both successful and failed BI projects as well. So I really don't have an answer to should I do the certification courses. It's really up to you if you're willing to spend the money, but don't assume that it's going to necessarily land you that job or it's necessarily going to make you a good BI developer. It teaches you the specifics of particular tool sets. And that final point, that healthy skepticism, trust no one. Even I've got a certain agenda. I've got a particular viewpoint of the data warehousing industry, and all of the material that I sort of present comes filtered through that kind of lens. And whilst I try to be an objective, independent academic researcher, there's personal biases with everyone, but particularly with the vendors. You need to be aware that what the vendors are putting out, and that's the bulk of the material that's out there, is there to sell products. Like I said, don't ignore it, but have that healthy skepticism, that internal critical thinking skill to parse the information as you're reading it is really important. So trust no one. Don't just believe what everyone says. Work it out for yourself. Okay, so a couple of things about data warehousing here in Australia. Like I said, I haven't changed these slides for a long time because they're still fundamentally true. The industry really does need good, skilled people who understand what's different about business intelligence and data warehousing. The bulk of the technical human resource skill set here in Melbourne, and this is true generally around the world as well, comes from more traditional IT backgrounds. People who haven't studied data warehousing in the way that you guys have, or business intelligence, in which many of you are studying it. So it's treated as a large relational database, and as a result, a lot of projects fail. Remember, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that one of the key predictors for success that we've seen in case studies that we've done here in Australia is past experience on data warehousing projects, regardless of what that experience was. Even if it was a failed project, the fact that people had had that experience made them understand the fundamental difference about data warehousing, which is critical to understand. And not just data warehousing, but BI as well. Outsourcing is still something which we're wrestling with. Organisations have started to, I think we've sort of gone the other way now. We're starting to see a bit more insourcing happening, but there's a lot of systems out there that are outsourced and managed by third parties outside of the enterprise. And even if the data warehousing project is done in-house, those data sources are being managed and run by third parties. And very often the service level agreements, the contracts that an enterprise will have with an outsourcing vendor don't necessarily include provisioning of data for the ETL process, sucking it into the data warehouse. I was at a conference last year where this quote came from, and this guy was talking about outsourcing their data warehouse development. This was the Teradata conference that they have every year, Teradata Universe, I think it is. So one of the speakers was a Teradata customer, and they outsourced their development to, I think it was a company in India. It was several time zones away. These guys were one of the large European banks. So different time zones, different culture, right down to the point of they had to teach them what they meant by a bank. Really fundamental, basic stuff that someone who worked in Europe in the banking industry would fundamentally understand, but because these people were working in different country, different regulatory environment, and they weren't bankers, they didn't understand. So there were all sorts of problems for this particular bank developing their data warehouse, and they ended up not insourcing, but outsourcing to a closer local firm. So it was another European country, but because the time zones were much more similar, it was easier to manage the work. And they still had issues teaching these people about banking in their organisation, but at least they understood the sort of European banking regulatory framework. So outsourcing is quite problematic, not just from a contractual side of things with getting data from source systems, but data warehousing requires a understanding of the nature of the data that the industry works with, but also the specific decision-making requirements of the users. If you ignore that, then all you're doing is building data infrastructure in the hope that someone's going to use it. in the hope that it's going to improve decision making in the organisation. Every organisation is different, and if you've done 5094, you should be convinced of the fact that every manager is different. And those idiosyncratic requirements drive the need for the design requirements for the data warehouse. If you ignore that, then you end up designing something which doesn't solve the right problem. So outsourcing is continuing to be an issue, both here but internationally as well. So what's happening in the long term? Well, the industry keeps changing its name. For a while now, we've settled on the business intelligence term. That's been something which has been around now since, well, Howard Dresner claims to have invented it in 1989, but it really became popular around 2000 or so. In fact, we did a bit of research on the term BI, business intelligence. It actually goes back to a a research paper written by an IBM researcher in 1956, I think it was. So even though Howard Dresner, who was a Gartner analyst at the time, claimed to have invented the term in 1989, he didn't. It was actually about 40 years older than that. Anyway, so this ongoing evolution, and we're starting to see crop up, it's becoming more and more common now, the use of the term business analytics instead of business intelligence. So the BI industry is starting to become the BA industry. But still fundamentally doing the same thing, still fundamentally grappling with the same problems, and the sort of problems we had with executive information systems, or if you go right back to the 1960s, the management information systems, they're still the same problems we're grappling with today. The technology's changed, the technology's improved, things have got faster, we've got more access to more data, but the fundamental problem's never really been about access to more data. It's about improving the decision-making process, helping people make sense of the data they've got, helping decision makers use that data to make more effective decisions. So the more things change, the more they stay the same. The vendors are switching around a bit, particularly at the delivery system side of things. Microsoft is continuing to have a big effect. They've solidified their position now as a mainstream database vendor and encroaching on the data warehousing side of things as well. They've always been sort of there for the data mart side of things, but they're starting to become used for larger scale data warehouses too. Teradata is out there. They're pushing this idea of active enterprise intelligence, the kind of idea of sort of almost real-time data feeds and so on. But interestingly, and this was something I observed at the last couple of their conferences, their user group conferences, they're pushing more and more towards driving business intelligence, or now business analytics, down to the operational layer of the organisation. And there's all sorts of reasons why they're doing that. But at the same time, we see ERP vendors pushing up the idea of using ERP higher and higher in the organisation to moving into the BI space. So there's this convergence of ERP vendors and data warehousing vendors trying to steal each other's market, I think. So it's interesting to see that play out, because the skill sets you need to do transaction processing are fundamentally different to the skill sets you need to do data warehousing. So I suspect that the data warehousing vendors like Teradata are going to do operational stuff. Perhaps poorly is too strong a word, but not particularly as effectively as ERP vendors. And I suspect the ERP vendors are not doing or going to do BI as effectively as the BI vendors. But SAP's purchased, was it Business Objects? I keep getting mixed up. IBM purchased Cognos, SAP purchased Business Objects. So the ERP vendors are merging with or acquiring BI companies, and that happened a couple of years ago. So they're trying to acquire that skill set through mergers and acquisitions. And it's interesting to see that some of the innovation has stopped a little bit as the organisations spend time, instead of developing the products, trying to integrate the products that they've acquired through the merger with their existing product set. So there's been a bit of a stall with things like Business Objects and Cognos and so on in terms of their innovation. Have a chat with Steve Remington about innovation at some stage. Open source BI has been around for a little while now. So Pentaho, for example, which we used in the ETL tutorial, that's an open source application. They've got business intelligence tools in addition to their ETL tools, so reporting tools and so on. So that's all open source. Greenplum is an open source data warehousing vendor, for example. So they're starting to become a bit more mainstream. A small percentage of the market, but it's growing. And this idea that you can go out and purchase a data warehousing appliance is kind of interesting too. And this is something that Teradata, for example, push quite heavily. If you want to buy a toaster or a microwave oven or a data warehouse, you pop down to your local Teradata store and they'll sell you a data warehousing appliance. If you want to double the capacity of your data warehousing appliance, you buy another one and plug it in, and they magically work together. And look, the technology that Teradata has got to do that is just spectacular. I've seen them talk about the sort of internal workings of their database management system and the operating systems that they use, and the hardware, and how it all talks to each other and is quite seamless, and it's really quite amazing. But in terms of actual improving decision making for managers, well, yeah, I'll reserve judgment. The focus with the vendors is so much on data management. They largely ignore the decision making process, and that's a real problem for the vendors. But it's true of the BI vendors as well, not just the data warehousing vendors, but the delivery system vendors too, are really quite poor when it comes to understanding the realities of decision making in organisations. So what's going to happen in the longer term? Well, the tools will get faster again. The databases will get bigger. Things like ODBC, standards like ODBC, will be slowly replaced by things like OLEDB, which is a more functional, expanded version of ODBC. Both of them are Microsoft standards, by the way, but that'll keep changing, but very slowly. Data warehousing people are learning a bit more about the delivery system. The focus on the delivery system is shifting. Query tools are now integrated in things like Microsoft Office. I saw a demo the other day. In fact, I showed a demo of business intelligence and data warehousing to my 9003 students. And the demo I used was SAP's, well, it was Business Objects. And it all happened within Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. It was their tool driving the data, but it was all happening within Microsoft Office, which is kind of a bizarre thought if you're doing business intelligence via PowerPoint. It's very strange. But there's obviously a market need for it. But fundamentally, we're going to still be making the same mistakes, because as long as the vendors are focused on data management issues and not decision support issues, we're still going to make those same errors about human decision making. And we're going to see more and more this convergence of the enterprise scale software vendors from the ERP side and the data warehousing side converging. So these are the mistakes I reckon are going to continue to be made. Information politics is still going to be ignored. There's still going to be problems with not understanding how people use information in the organisation, and the soft human factors, the social factors. We're still launching into big, large-scale enterprise warehouse projects without really thinking about the complexities of developing these kinds of things. We're really bad at estimating project timelines, so we're going to overshoot our budgets, overshoot our timelines again and again, because we underestimate the complexity. And we're also going to see lots of projects that get cancelled because they don't deliver something quickly. The key to a successful data warehousing project is to deliver quick wins quickly. Pick that low-hanging fruit, to mix my metaphors. Develop something in the first couple of months, get it out to users so you can start getting feedback. Remember that decision support doesn't start happening until evolution starts happening, and evolution can't start happening until there's an initial system for people to use. Once there's that initial system, then not only does that help to better define what the requirements are and kickstart that evolutionary process, but it also evangelises the project in the organisation, or demonstrates the usefulness of the project in the organisation, so that you start to get people coming on board and pushing for the data warehouse project to go ahead. So small scale, iterative development, start small, deliver a pilot project, deliver it quickly, demonstrate those short wins, and then iterate over the longer term to build up the warehouse. But similarly, we see lots and lots of data mart projects that kind of organically happen in organisations, that just naturally bubble up. So you end up with organisations with this massive problem of data management from an ETL perspective. So this independent data mart architecture can be hard to manage. So short-term projects that fail in the long term because they don't think about the medium to long-term sort of engineering issues, and large-scale projects that fail because they don't think about the short-term requirements in terms of decision support and winning the sort of hearts and minds of the users. Fundamentally, building data warehousing and doing business intelligence is about working with senior people in organisations, and we don't train our IT people enough to be able to do that effectively. They speak different languages. It's hard on a communication level. So that means we struggle to win over our users. We struggle to understand our users' requirements. We adopt a traditional linear methodology, waterfall-style methodology for these projects, and it just doesn't work. And we're going to keep doing that as long as we, do the same kind of IT education that we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. Cultural assumptions will be ignored. We haven't talked too much about culture this semester, largely because we haven't had space to do it. But we've done some interesting research, or some of our PhD students have done some interesting research on different cultural environments and sort of the cultural assumptions behind systems like decision support systems, executive information systems and data warehouses. These technologies were invented in the United States. They're developed within a US-style corporate, Western corporate kind of environment. And when they get deployed in other cultures, say the Middle East or Southeast Asia or China and so on, there's different cultural assumptions in organisations, and organisations operate fundamentally differently. So we've seen some of the research that our PhD students have done that demonstrates that when you take this technology and embed it in a fundamentally culturally different organisation, it tends to fail. And when you embed it in organisations that are similar to US-style, Western capitalist organisations, they tend to work, even when that organisation is based in another country. So we've had some people do some studies in Thailand, for example, and compared a Western-style organisation in Thailand to a more traditional Thai company and looked at the BI projects there. It was really interesting to see what happens. So none of that gets discussed in IT courses. It gets touched on briefly and sort of around the edges, but it's a fundamental problem for systems that are designed to go deep into organisations and operate on certain cultural assumptions. And we're still going to get this idea that data warehouses are fundamentally the same as other kinds of IT systems, and the same approaches, the same design techniques are going to work. They just don't. It is fundamentally different. So the key thing for you guys to keep in mind is data warehousing is different. It's about supporting managers, and the key problem for managers is not more information. Despite what the vendors say, they need better information. They need to be able to make sense of the information that they've got. Infrastructure is important, but it shouldn't be the main priority. So the infrastructure is there to serve this need of understanding the information better to improve the decision-making process. And that's kind of the message I want to finish on. So for you guys, I'm not sure why I've titled this Notes, but stay in touch with us. The DSS lab here at Monash, we do research on business intelligence, data warehousing and so on. We're always interested in staying in touch with you guys to see what happens when you get out to industry. We like case studies, we like war stories. We like to invite people back to do guest lectures and things like that and tell new students about their experience. We're also interested in bringing on board research students as well who are interested in doing research in this area. So if you've got that sort of HD average and you're interested in doing some research with us, come and have a chat. I think you're all aware we've got a blog, we've got a DSS Lab website that we're in the process of revamping. The blog is woefully out of date. I haven't posted there for about 6 months. I promise to do a bit more on that soon. But stay in touch with us is essentially what I'm talking about. Stay in touch with the industry, but stay in touch with us as well and tell us what you're doing, because we want to know what you're doing as well. All right, so read and think, get engaged with the industry, stay plugged in. Read and think's there twice. I'm not sure why, but it's worth repeating twice. So get on those vendor mailing lists, go along to events, keep that healthy scepticism though, and enjoy. Data warehousing and business intelligence, I reckon, is one of the most interesting bits of the IT industry. You get to deal with interesting things, you have a really significant impact on organisations, and when you improve things, you can significantly improve things for organisations and outcomes for the organisations as well. So enjoy it, embrace it, work with it, and participate, be active in it. Okay, thanks guys. All right, well that's all I've kind of got for the actual content of the lecture. Have you guys got any comments, or perhaps questions are the wrong thing to talk about? Have you got any comments that you'd like to make about the unit? I need to remind you on that topic, the unit evaluations. If you haven't done the unit evaluations for this unit or any other unit, please do so. We take them very, very seriously. So it's important that you guys fill them out. So any comments from you? You want to talk about the exam? Yeah, okay, let's talk about the exam then. Okay, so the exam is fundamentally the same as previous semesters. So if you've had a look at the past exam papers, the style of questions is going to be fairly similar. But there is one tweak I've made to the format of the exam. It used to be that you would pick 3 questions from a selection of 6 or 7 questions on the exam paper. So 6 or 7 essay-style questions, you pick 3 and you answer them in the 2 hours given. The tweak I've made is that I've introduced 1 compulsory question. So question 1 you have to answer, and then you choose 2 from the remaining 5 questions. So basically the same, as just that question 1 is now compulsory. Excuse me. So you've got 2 hours to do it. There's the usual 10-minute reading time. Each question has equal weighting, so roughly divide the exam time by 3 to spend as a guide to how much time you actually spend answering each question. How should you study for the exam? Well, you guys are all postgrad students. You've done dozens and dozens of exams. So this is a little bit like teaching you guys how to suck eggs. But what I'm looking for in the answers to the exam are insight and understanding. So we're not looking for memorisation. There's a few things you should be able to rattle off, like the subject-oriented, integrated, non-volatile, time-variant stuff, and that sort of stuff about evolution, and you should be able to explain that. Even if you don't memorise the words on the slide, you should be able to explain that concept fairly easily. But what I'm fundamentally looking for is not skills in memorisation, it's ability to explain your understanding, what you've learnt in the semester. So the key thing for you guys is, I guess, when you're studying, because there's a bit of flexibility about which questions you answer in the exam, and there's fairly decent coverage of the different topics. There's 6 questions, and we've had 12 weeks, so it doesn't quite line up, but the chances of there being a couple of topics that you understand pretty well being on the exam are pretty good. So go over those areas again, refresh your memory, go over the lecture notes, go over the podcast again, listen to some of the lecture notes as well. There's areas where you're a little bit weak, go over that material as well again. Make sure you've done the reading and that you've taken notes during the reading as well. So look over your notes about those readings and catch up wherever you perhaps missed those readings. Post questions too to the discussion forum on Moodle. So just as we've had the discussion forum open for the assignment work, we'll have the discussion forums open for the exam as well. So feel free to post questions there, and I'll follow up right up until the date of the exam. So we're looking for insight, understanding, demonstrated understanding. So as with this assignment here, what we're looking for is a well-structured, well-argued answer. They're all essay questions, so you should have a reasonable structure. I'm not looking for headings and introduction and conclusion, but there should be a good structure to your answer, and there should be some kind of conclusion at the end that directly answers the question. One of the most heartbreaking things for an examiner as they're going through exam papers, at least for me anyway, is reading this long screed of material about the topic that the question is on, and it's all good material, but you get to the end and the question was never actually answered. So make sure you actually answer the question. Don't just skim read and look for keywords in the question and then write everything you know on those keywords. Make it a directed answer. Make sure you actually answer the question. So it needs to be relevant and on topic and actually address the question. In terms of the lead up to the exam, most of the past exam papers are available through the library, so you can get lots and lots of sample questions. You'll get a feel for the nature of those questions. When you get to the point, maybe a day or 2 before the actual exam itself, recreate the exam environment for yourself and do an exam. Part of that is about trying out your style of answer, but part of it is sort of subconscious as well. It's about taking some of the stress out of the exam environment. The more exposed you are to an exam environment, the less stressful it becomes when you're in the real thing. So it's kind of a psychological trick to your mind. When you're in the real exam, your subconscious isn't freaking out going, this is all very strange and all very stressful, because you've done it before. So do that, have that practice run. In the exam itself, the main thing is don't stress. Be as relaxed as possible, which I know is a bit, it's fine for me to say because I don't have to sit the exam, but as much as you can, please be as calm and stress-free as possible. You've got 3 questions to answer in 2 hours, so that's roughly 40 minutes per question. But leave a bit of a fudge factor in the exam so that, if you don't quite finish an answer, you can go back and fix it up later. Give yourself time to reread what you've written at the end of the exam. So you want sort of 15 minutes or so at the end to... Please don't use pencil. Please don't use pencil. Use pen, but if you make a mistake, just cross it out. That's fine. I'm happy to skip over a crossed out section. It also means that if you've crossed it out rather than tried to erase it with pencil, I can kind of read what you've crossed out, so that if you're on the right track anyway, I can see where you're coming from and maybe give you some marks. Yeah, but pencil is, oh, please don't use pencil. Yeah. It smudges, it's hard to read, Okay, so give yourself enough time to go back and make changes, but fundamentally make sure you've answered the question. So spend 5 minutes reading your essays and say, well, does this essay actually address the question that's in the exam paper? And as I said, we're not looking for memorisation, we're looking for a logical, well-reasoned answer. If you do that, you're going to score well, you'll get an HD. I always get the question, how many pages should I write on each question? Well, how long is a piece of string? Some people's handwriting is big and messy, other people's handwriting is very small and sometimes messy as well. You can't give a page count. If you're writing half a page, that's much too small. If you're writing 15 pages, that's probably much too much, depending on your handwriting style, of course. It's how much can you write on the topic, addressing the question in 40 minutes. That's the rule of thumb to use. So make sure it's directly on the question. Don't waffle, don't meander, don't try to make stuff up, because I can spot that a mile away. Just make it direct, topical, and actually addressing the question, and you'll do really well. So that's it. All I can say is really good luck with the exam, and stay in touch. Like I said, the Moodle forums will be remain active throughout the exam period, so feel free to post questions, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the study period. So it's over to you guys, really. It's 10:50. We can spend the rest of the lecture looking at exam questions if you want. You can ask questions now. The tutorial session, again, is just a chance for you to ask questions. We'll run that for as long as you want us to run that. If there's no questions, we can close the tutorial down after 5 minutes. If there's lots of questions, we can run it for the full 2 hours, and that'll be good too. So, do you guys want to take a break? Do you want to ask questions? It's up to you now. I've got all of the past exams in a folder, so I can pull up some of those past exams if you want. And of course, it opens up over here. I just had a panic for a second, thinking, oh, I've put the 2011 exam up there as well, but no, that's okay. So what do you want to do? Do you want to look at some exam questions? Yep. Have you had a chance to look at some already? Is there some that you know that you want to look at, or should? Yeah? Cool. Have you got a specific exam paper, or? All right. You got 2008, 2010, semester 1? Up. Okay, so let me just close this door. It's a bit loud out there. Okay, so this is what the exam paper looks like. This is last year's exam. So you'll see there's a cover page, no calculators, no books, no blah, 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 the standard sort of faculty template. So unfortunately no foreign language dictionaries as well, that's included in that. So be very careful about what you bring into the exam. As I said, the only change to the format of the paper this year is that question 1 is now a compulsory question. So you have to answer question 1 and then you choose 2 from the remaining 5 questions to answer. So did you have a particular question you wanted to look at? Davenport's concept of information politics. Okay, so this was a lecture topic a couple of weeks ago, about week 8 or so, I think. So Davenport's and Prusak and a bunch of other authors listed on the book went out and looked at different organisations and looked at their information culture, their information politics. It's based on the idea that information isn't just this independent, objective thing that organisations have to manage and it sort of flows through an enterprise. Information often defines the organisational power that different people in the organisation have. So if you control certain aspects of information, then you become useful to the organisation. A lot of people's jobs these days are defined as knowledge workers. So the information that they can contribute, or the sort of insight that they can give to that information is the value that they add to the organisation. So Davenport wasn't writing about data warehousing at all. It was purely just about information politics in organisations, and he identified a number of different organisational cultures. So he came up with, I think it was five different sort of organisational cultures, one of which isn't really a culture, it's more of a strategy rather than a culture, or maybe a mindset, I guess. So the first one that he identified was this idea of an anarchic information culture, where there's no sort of enterprise-wide structure. It's everyone for themselves. They manage their own information, different standards, different policies, and it's kind of the Wild West from an information management perspective. Has its advantages for the individuals in the enterprise, but it loses the advantages of the sort of benefits of scale, that you get common definitions of terms and things like that become really hard to achieve. The next model was not anarchy, but feudalism. So there's some sort of explicit attempts to manage information in a sound kind of way, but it's very ad hoc and patchy throughout the organisation. So it tends to be centred around individual business units. So individual managers of those units might come up with certain information policies and mandate sort of sharing of information in a particular way, but there's no enterprise-wide kind of approach. And Davenport's argument, I guess, is that if you want to effectively use enterprise information, you need that cross-enterprise approach. Otherwise, doing things like decision support, business intelligence, becomes too hard to do. That's not his argument, but the kinds of strategies that those tools allow you to do become hard to do. So he identified two kinds of approaches to achieving that enterprise approach. There's the monarchic kind of structure, where a senior manager in the organisation, say the CEO, uses their sort of personal authority and mandate to say, okay, we're going to adopt a consistent, across-the-board approach to managing information. And that's fine, that can work, but once the CEO leaves or gets replaced and moves on, then that kind of mandate or that kind of initiative often gets lost along the way. So the kind of preferred approach that Davenport talks about is what he calls the federal kind of structure, where it's still senior management, but senior management as a group. So it's perhaps all of the different C-level executives from across different organisational areas use their collective sort of political mandate to come up with a consistent approach. And the advantage is that if any one particular member moves on, like the CEO or the CFO or whatever, the mandate doesn't disappear with them. It gets attached to the group rather than the individual. Achieving that can be quite hard to do, though. So whilst it's sort of Davenport's preferred approach, getting agreement across the enterprise can be really hard to do. There's entrenched sort of mindsets and things like that. So it requires negotiation and cooperation. The other sort of model, which I don't really think is a model that Davenport talked about, was technocratic utopianism. So this is the kind of third approach to trying to achieve that enterprise kind of approach, enterprise consistency, and that's to use technology to do it. So this idea that if you build a system like a data warehouse, then that's going to impose this cross-organisational view, and everything will be sort of lollipops and sunshine. It often doesn't work because technology itself, it doesn't change anything. It's how you apply that technology. You have to fit the technology to the culture. So that, of course, has impacts for data warehousing and BI. Like I said, Davenport wasn't talking about data warehousing and BI, but there's obvious parallels there, or there's obvious implications for deploying systems that can disrupt those information political structures. And if you're not aware of the information politics in an enterprise when you try to build a data warehouse, then chances are you're going to make a number of mistakes. You make blunders and so on. So, for example, you wouldn't try to deploy an enterprise data warehouse in an anarchic kind of information culture, or even a feudal information culture. You'd adopt a more dispersed, decentralised approach, like say an independent data mart, for example. Even if you've got sort of the monarchic kind of approach, achieving the sort of federal data bus kind of architecture can be quite difficult because you need common definitions of terms and things like that. You need buy-in from the organisation, so you probably use a federated approach with the federal style structure that Davenport talked about. And it's purely coincidence that the words are kind of the same. I mean, they obviously have their same root definition, but a federal architecture's got nothing to do with Davenport's idea of a federal political approach. It's just that's kind of the common mindset that's required. So an enterprise data warehouse approach you'd only deploy with a monarchic or federal approach. Same with the federated data mart approach. The independent data mart approach is appropriate for the more decentralised, more chaotic kind of organisational environments. So really you've got to match your architecture and your approach, your data warehousing approach, to the prevailing information culture. You can try and change the culture a little bit. So you might try to choose an ideal culture and try to introduce a strategy to try to achieve that culture, but that strategy is not going to be achieved by a data warehouse alone. So it's about being realistic about what you can achieve with the technology. So if you write all of that in 40 minutes, in a much more well-structured, thought-out, planned way than I've just rambled on about, you'd get an HD. But remember, keep in mind, what I did at the end there was bring it all back to data warehousing. So make sure you do that. So don't just spot Davenport and go, right, what do I know about Davenport, and then write a whole lot of stuff. It's got to be relevant to the actual question. Yeah. Well, you can't sort of wrap up an essay-style answer without some kind of conclusion, but I don't expect a heading, conclusion, and then a paragraph. It's, so long as it concludes, and as long as there is a conclusion conceptually, that's what I'm looking for. Sure, as long as it contributes to and is directly relevant to the question. Yep. Question 2. So this is, Inmon argues that the first phase of the development of data warehouse should be the construction of a corporate data model. Why might not this be a good idea? Well, why might it not be a good idea? Apart from the fact that Rob hates corporate data models, but sorry, I cut someone off.
It was time-consuming and very high cost.
Yeah, that's the main problem. It's a big project in and of itself, and we've seen time and again the successful data warehousing projects are those that can deliver quick wins quickly early on in the project. So start small and iterate your way up. And whilst a corporate data model may be handy to have, I wouldn't be delaying the data warehousing project and treating it as the first phase of the data warehousing project just because we haven't got a corporate data warehouse. It's nice to have, but certainly not necessary, and creates all sorts of problems. But in answering the question, you might talk about what a corporate data warehouse, corporate data model is, and why it might be useful. So you'd perhaps argue Inmon's point about why it might be useful to have a corporate data warehouse, but then you'd move on to the negative sides as well, and then at the conclusion, perhaps take a stand. It doesn't have to agree with my particular point of view, but you need to balance up the different views and come to an opinion yourself that's justified. Do you want me to pop open one of the other papers? I'll do that anyway. Let's go way back in time. Let's go back to 2004. Let's open up over here. 2004, I inherited this subject from someone else, so the exam was quite different back then. And it used to be called IMS 5026. So when you're searching in the library for past exam papers, do both FIT 5095 and IMS 5026 to pull up the past papers. So in that one, in that paper, there were defined definitions of terms, there was contrast and comparing terms, and then there were more sort of essay-style type questions at the end. Even though the format of the exam is completely different, you should be able to define I reckon each of these things. We didn't talk about indexes much, but if you've done 9003, you should know what an index is. Sorry? Does everyone understand what granularity is?
So in this team, we have any question by definition?
Yeah, not in our exam. No, our exam, the exam this year is just essay-style questions. Yeah, so we don't do this. I found that doing this style of thing took me ages and ages and ages to mark and wasn't a good predictor of the final outcome anyway. So it was the essay questions that demonstrated the sort of depth of understanding. So that's why I changed the style of the exam. And your knowledge of these kinds of things comes out in your answers anyway. So is there anything there that you don't know the definition of and you want me to explain?
No? About the benefits of using the snowflake
There are none. There we go, done. Sorry, no, that's a very biased view. Snowflaking, does everyone understand what a snowflake is? The white crystal of ice? No. It's when you normalise the dimension tables for a star schema. And usually this is done because a database designer, a data modeler, can't let go of the need to normalise stuff. The whole point of dimensional modelling is to come up with an easy to understand, intuitive data structure that defines an information space that allows users to explore the data that's available in the data warehouse. We're trying to encourage experimentation and exploration by the end users. So the whole point of dimensional modelling is to make that very simple to implement from a database perspective, but also because the data structure is much more observable in the user interface of business intelligence tools than it is for transaction processing tools, the data structure itself almost becomes a user interface element. And we need that to be as intuitive and easy to understand as possible. The data structure is much more exposed to the end users. So the reason why we do dimensional modelling is to come up with these simple to understand structures, and the reason we can get away with it is because data warehouses aren't subject to insert, update and delete anomalies. So some of you may remember me discussing this a little bit in 9003. When you do denormalisation, some of the physical modelling decisions you make about denormalisation are about making the queries run more efficiently. It shifts, when you denormalise, you shift the processing load from from the select type queries to insert, update and delete type queries. A normalised structure runs very efficiently for insert, update and delete, but very inefficiently for select queries. A denormalised structure is the opposite. It runs quite efficiently for select queries because you've got merged tables, but inefficiently for insert, update and delete. What's the most common thing, most processor intensive thing we do with a data warehouse? Select. So it makes sense to denormalise. But people just can't let go of normalisation. It seems that once we teach you to normalise, you have this innate need to normalise everything. So my suspicion is that Snowflake schemas are about the personal hang-ups of the data modeler rather than any kind of direct benefit to the data warehouse. So the advantage of normalising the dimension tables is that the ETL process perhaps runs a little bit more efficiently. But from an end user perspective, from a performance perspective, it actually slows things down. If you want to do a query by one of these outrigger tables, you've got 2 joins to do rather than just the 1 or even 0 joins that you get with a simple, straightforward select query. Now that doesn't include the idea of degenerate dimensions, mini dimensions, where you might take out a hierarchy within a dimension and create its own mini dimension, but it's directly attached to the fact table, and it has you're essentially allocating a primary key to that hierarchy within the dimension so that it makes it easier to analyse by that hierarchical level. And the reason you do that is because perhaps some of the analysis is happening at that higher levels in the hierarchy than at the bottom level of the granularity that's been defined. So it's quite reasonable to do mini dimensions and degenerate dimensions, which is kind of like normalising a dimension table. But the reason you're doing it is not for normalisation. The reason you're doing it is to get that foreign key in the fact table to allow you to slice the fact table more effectively. So I think Snowflake schemas, I've never seen a really good argument for them. But there are arguments for other structures like mini dimensions and so on.
During the assignment, I read an article about, I think it was Pfizer or Procter & Gamble, I don't remember, and they were developing a new data warehouse basically based on star schemas.
Okay. How old was the article?
What?
How old was the case study?
2009.
Okay, so pretty recent then, yeah. So they claim, was it new for them or new as in...
It's in my...
I'll read it in the essay.
Anyway, they weren't using data warehouse stuff. They weren't like making basically use...
Mm. So you're saying did they build a data warehouse and not use it, or?
You have like an original database.
Yep.
Instead of extracting the data and
Oh, so they left it in the operational systems and then created views to. Yeah, that's fairly common, particularly with independent data mart structures. So rather than doing a full-blown ETL, you point it at the source, your little data mart at the source systems, and maybe you cache things. In fact, maybe you don't even have a data mart. You just have a, say, business objects installation or a Cognos installation. It's the delivery system, because the delivery systems have all got the data sourcing routines built into them as well, because they have to get it from a data warehouse if it's there. But there's no reason why you can't point it at an operational system, and that's often what happens. So a couple of people get a license for a business intelligence tool, and they point it to the data sources that they need. So it quite often happens. The problems with that tend to crop up in the mid to long term. So all of a sudden the managers of the operational system start to notice performance goes down, and there's the data quality issues at the BI end that aren't being resolved and so on. So the enterprise answer to that is, oh, let's build data warehouses to manage the sort of common data management needs. Yeah, but yeah, it is quite common. Yeah, probably not as an enterprise strategy though. It tends to be more smaller scale, a natural kind of evolution of BI in an organisation. Question 3. Describe the learning process at the core of BI systems use and what this means for the data warehousing development process. Slide number 2, I think. What do you guys think is the learning process at the core of data warehousing use or BI system use? Exactly right. So what's that process? What is that learning process? Mm-hmm.
Starts to wonder where else can they take this particular idea, and it starts evolving.
Yeah, exactly. So as they start using the system, it changes their understanding of the task, and that then leads to a changed understanding of information requirements. That means you've got to change the system to keep up with the changes. That adaptive evolutionary use comes about because it's fundamentally a learning process for the end users. The decision-making process, the BI system use process is fundamentally about learning about the decision problem. So that learning process engenders change, and that drives evolution of the BI system, and that therefore drives change of the data warehouse as well. So the question is about Peter Keane, that slide that I had before, of that user using the system, changing their understanding and so on. So you discuss all of that. You'd perhaps also talk a little bit about development methodologies as well. So because of the need for evolution, you need a development methodology that can handle feedback from use. And you might also talk about that evolution being driven not just by this learning process, but also by technical factors as well. So changes in source systems and things like that. So evolution is driven by a number of different factors, not just the user learning. But the emphasis in this question should be on that learning side. Okay, so that's question 3. Question 4 is not the style of question that I would normally ask in the exam. I might have a question about dimensional modelling, for example, with Kimball, and I'd get you to discuss dimensional modelling, and maybe you'd bring up the processes. But this question is much more about encouraging memorisation of those steps. That's not really what this year's exam is about. Information politics, that's basically the same question as the one we answered a second ago. Let's have a look at another one. Let's go to 2005. Any of these ones you want me to look at? There's that Davenport question again, pops up. Why is evolutionary development important for data warehousing? That's basically the same as that learning process question as well. What about the differences between Kimball's and Inmon's approach? That assumes you've read the sort of Kimball manifesto stuff, and then you've read the Inmon and Hackathon paper. Data quality get you to talk about the Wand and Wang kind of stuff, the idea of integrity, referential integrity and population integrity and those kinds of things, and discuss the idea that data quality is not just this objective thing about whether or not data is correct or not, but it contains a lot of subjective aspects to it as well. So it incorporates the applicability, the appropriateness of that data for the use that it's being put to, and data warehousing being fundamentally about taking data acquired for one purpose and using it for a different purpose. So that creates all sorts of data quality issues that just aren't seen at the transaction layer. So you should be able to talk about that for a fair bit. All right, that's 2005. Here's semester 2. This is back when we had 220 students per class. And we had to run the unit twice a year to cope with the load. Can you imagine marking 220 assignments? The exams nearly killed me that year. Question 2 is a good one. I like question 2, so it tends to crop up now and again. I won't say that it's on this year's exam, but it's certainly an answer that you should be able to rattle off. So Ackoff, way back in 1967, he was talking about MIS systems and said, look, managers don't need more information, they need better information. The sort of assumptions behind MIS are fundamentally false, and that's why the MIS systems fail. And nearly all of those assumptions have been rehashed by vendors trying to sell data warehouses in their vendor literature. So there's a lot of sort of repeating history stuff behind the data warehousing industry and failures. So question 2, I'd get you to talk about how data warehouses are different, what it means in terms of mindset, and how you approach data warehousing. So Ackoff's point and the sort of lessons that we learned from the introduction of decision support systems in the 1970s is that a focus on decision making and the decision making process rather than data management issues is critical for a successful decision support, management support. So by building data warehouses focusing just on data management, chances are you're going to end up with infrastructure that isn't appropriate for the actual improvements to decision making. Anything else you want me to look at there? Question 5 is a doozy. That goes back to that tutorial though that we had. So if you've done that tutorial on data warehouse failure cases, you could talk about all those different cases. And if you did the essay topic on success factors, then you could talk about that there too. So. All right. So have you guys got any specific questions that you want me to address, or should we wrap up? I can show you more exam papers if you like, but they're all there for you to look at in your own time as well. So. No? Okay, well, look, we'll wrap it up there then. We will run the tutorials, but like I said, the tutorial sessions, the content is up to you guys. So if we wrap up after 5 minutes, I'm okay with that. I'm sure Felix is okay with that too. But if you want to go for the full 2 hours, we're both down with that as well. So as long as we're helping you do better on the exam, then we're happy. So good luck with the exam, good luck with the rest of your assignments, and good luck with your other exams as well. Stay in touch, and we'll see you maybe in 5093. Cheers, guys. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Last time got missed.
Oh, yes. It's in the pile now. Hi.
Can I just go get it printed out and return it to you?
Yep, so get it to me before 12.
Should I come here or to you?
I'll be in my office until a bit before 12.
So I can come and give it to you?
Yeah. Okay, no worries. Hey.
First assignment.
It'll be in my office. If you haven't grabbed it, it'll be in my office. Yeah.
So you're going up there.
Yep.
Thank you.
That's all right.
Been a pleasure.
Good luck with the exam. Cheers. Hi.
That ask you about research.
So actually, what is the good time to apply? Because I have another unit which I haven't finished with BI, which is BI model. I'm going to do it next semester. So what's the good time?
Well, it depends. What's your grade average?
What do you mean?
this is the second semester for me.
Yeah. So what sort of grades did you get last semester?
So I got the finding that I took 4 financial diseases, so except that one, the average is
Okay. So what sort of age? Like we're talking 90 or we're talking 80?
no, 80.
It depends on how well you do this semester. But we expect, in the DSS lab, we expect an HD average to consider doing research degree. There's also the minor thesis you have to transfer across from, I assume you're in the MBIS, you have to transfer across to the MBIS honours to do a minor thesis. If you're interested in doing a high degree like research, so a full master's research, PhD, you have to finish this course. No, you have to just do a research. Have you got a research component to your bachelor's degree at all?
She's gonna do it. She's gonna do it.
Okay, well, if you haven't got the undergraduate honours thesis, then and research is really something you're interested in, you need to think about transferring across the MBIS honours. And you do that at the end of this semester. So this is your second semester, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So at the end of this semester, if you've got a D average, then you can transfer across to the MBIS honours. Then you do a research methods unit, advanced topics in information systems, which are the great ones.
Are you doing now?
But it's fun.
It's hard for that it is fun, and you know, if you can't do that, you can't do research because it's the same kind of skill set. And then you do a minor thesis in perhaps advanced, or maybe by that stage you'll change your mind to do some other area. You do your research project, and if you get an H1, an HD for your minor thesis, then you can do say PhD or something. So that's the course that you want to do.
So actually, I will start the minor thesis program course next semester or the
Yeah. So at the end of this semester, if you transfer across,
Yeah.
you'd start you do the research method subject and the advanced topics subject in the first semester. Yeah, next semester.
Okay, so
Yes, and you'd start the minor thesis, and you'd be doing an extra semester on top of what you would do for the MBA. So the MBIS honours is a 2-year degree, not a 18-month degree. But yeah, that's the process.
okay, so I had to talk with the course coordinator.
Steve. Oh yeah, Steve Wright. I'm actually the deputy director, so if you either talk to Steve Wright or yourself, we can give you the brochures and point you in the right direction. But yeah, get your exams done. I strongly prefer it, but there's no
No, I have another assignment back in. So worried.
Is there,
I think Jason just got a fraction before.
is there any chance that we can get all the past exam paper from this folder? Because I can find that we can just get 6 or something from the...
Okay. Yeah, look, I'm happy to send out any of the past ones. So you should have, probably going back to 2008.
Yep.
If you do a search for IMS 5026, you'll probably get a couple of those older ones as well.
The DEF one, we don't have.
That's a deferred exam.
Oh, deferred.
And the deferred exams are, I usually take questions from the other exams anyway.
Oh, really?
So you'll find that there's not too much different.
Okay, so,
But you're welcome to them if you want. So,
okay, thank you.
in fact, what I might do is I might just upload this folder to Moodle. Okay.
By the way, for the research and the minor thesis for the MBIS, for the DSS one, it really requires 2 semesters to do it.
Yeah, so the minor thesis will take at least a year to do.
Yeah, because the next one is my last one. If I change to honor, I may need to extend my...
Yeah. Well, you would have to anyway because it's a 2-year degree, not an 18-month degree. So, yeah.
It's 4 semesters.
Thank you.
But you can apply for the
That's okay, you can-
for the PR for that.
For
Yes.
the research,
Hello everyone. You can apply for a PR. Because you need
We don't offer immigration policy.
yeah, I'm already doing the 2 years.
Ah, okay. So you have been here from.
Yeah, this is
But some people say that if you have a master, with
So the information processing is like
Decision, specifically. So they do have a information processing mindset, but that's the wrong one.
I saw your assignment
but I hope
in FID 509.
It is, and it's important to do. But there's no point fixing up data quality.
A long diagram for the
You need to learn from here.
So my argument is that we should.
And the cooking was good. But your assignment was marvelous. Very nice. So, it said that I went to read your assignment too. So, I would like to read your assignment. Is it good? Is it good?
So it's about emphasis, right?
It depends.
Fun? Your assignment is good? I'm going to have some fun. Okay. Am I going to have some fun with you?
Yes, you will have fun.
I'm going to learn something.
I hope so.
Rob,
Felix.
did you see my marks?
I did, but I was on my iPad, so I didn't actually do anything with it. When I
Are
checked
you
my
going to do something?
Yeah, I'll bring them in. Put them into my spreadsheet.
And nothing else? So I
Should be
can
done. There weren't any fails or anything like that.
I have to for you to see.
Yeah, so I'll double check the ends, but other than that,
I have one who didn't do the mock-ups,
okay.
so I don't know what to do. I put a
Circle
zero.
the appropriate box. And
Yeah, zero, and the zero is without the mark is an N, so it's an 40.
yeah, look, yeah.
And I have another one that was
I don't want to. If it's an N, only because of the late submission. So if it wasn't an N,
no,
just
I
start.
have a list. No, it's two things together.
Okay. Well, if it's an N because of the content, then I need
The
to
concept.
Okay. Rate the content.
So-
My default N, my default C is say 65. My default N is 40. So rather than doing a sort of calculation,
What's the content for the previous one?
IMS 5026. It should be in one of the slides. What I'm actually going to do is that folder that I had of all the past exams, I'm going to upload that to Moodle. Okay. That's good. Yeah, so if the content is an N, make it 40 and then deduct the penalty from that.
Okay. Then I change that to 40. Right, we-
Have you incorporated in the marketing summary, did you incorporate the
I put that for late. No, but I didn't incorporate the that one.
okay, well I need to, did you say how many days later?
Yeah.
As long as I
Days.
can
And I have one assignment. Yeah, so
that's right, as long as I can look at it, there's not too many others.
and I have another one that it wasn't in my list. I don't know who.
I can look at LK Plus and see who they're supposed to be.
I didn't mark. Okay.
So they reckon. I'll take it up and have a look at LK Plus and see who it's supposed to be. across a new podcast called My Drunken Kitchen. It's basically a video of this girl when she's drunk. No, she burned her arm once.
I wasn't set in Australia. Oh, yeah, right. What did you do with it?
Was the food good? Was it worth it?
I know. You invented it.
Yeah.
No. Just start.